Hey everybody, it's Ruby here today, and today I wanted to discuss the two books that I had read in June that I think that a lot of you might be quite interested in. One of which is On the Graphic Novel by Santiago Garcia, which was lent to me by NetGalley, and the other is MetaMaus by Art Spiegelman. Which is about the graphic novel Maus, which I did a book review on, so I can link that down below. Both of these books deal with the concept of graphic novels, but they approach them in two different ways just by virtue of sort of what the point of the book is. So I'll discuss a little bit of what these two books are about and sort of how they're intertwined. On the Graphic Novel was something that was slightly heavier, and it was a book that deals with the concept of the graphic novel and how it came about. Because as some of you might already know, some of the comic book or graphic novel artists and writers tend to actually dislike the name of graphic novel and tend to call themselves like a comic book writer or illustrator. And there seems to be sort of a disagreement as to what those definitions are. So this book sort of goes through time as to what the comic books are. So different examples of some comics that you might know about, and how technically you could define it as pictures with some sort of words going in sort of a linear progression through time. But so he sort of wanted to talk about the history of the graphic novel and comics, and sort of how this is very new sort of art style that probably started sort of in the 1800s. So it was definitely interesting to read up on how artists started out doing like woodcuts or lithographs of pictures in the 1800s, how that went to newspapers, which was used to sort of convey more information, which then went to comic books, which was then censored, which then went underground to more artistic ones, which resulted in the graphic novel. And the end result that the author keeps mentioning is that Maus is a huge influence in what we consider to be the graphic novel, because Maus is a book-length comic, 2 volumes, that deals with a heavy subject that isn't related to superheroes, that isn't maybe avant-garde, underground, like Crumb style comics, but sort of reaches out to a general public, and that sort of opened the window for what could be considered a real sort of art piece. And in MetaMaus, it was also described that the success of Maus, which was almost instantaneous, resulted in people asking him to curate like comic strip museum pieces and sort of talk about and get into the open what the idea of comic books are, which I think is super important. And although he maybe didn't like it very much, Art Spiegelman was one of the main people that sort of made headway in this and sort of helped bring an awareness of the graphic novels. And an interesting thing to note too is that, I think this was mentioned by his wife, is that he actually did a conference on sort of the aesthetics and appeal of comic books. He sort of wanted to engage in a conversation with the use of comic books. So he had an idea, I guess, about what he wanted to do before he sort of created the story, and it just happened to be that the story that he wanted to write was his father's. And another interesting thing about MetaMaus is that it describes his research into the Holocaust, which I wasn't aware of. I kind of thought that he used a lot of images that are sort of well known today, but I discovered that when he was writing it in the 70s and 80s, I believe, there wasn't a lot of information on the Holocaust and on World War II, because at the time the survivors were just beginning to sort of deal with what was happening. So there wasn't a lot of awareness about it. So a lot of the books were sort of pulp fiction, semi-pornographic books about Nazis that didn't really reach an awareness until there was some of the trials with the Nazis. Night by Wiesel and Anne Frank's diary were both out in the open, but neither of them were really as well known as they are now. So he had to do most of his research through talking to people, finding images, and visiting the concentration camps. So he got as much as he could from his father, and then he sort of combined it all into this book. So this book is as accurate as possible about the Holocaust, which is super interesting. And it sort of made a headway for all of those other books that we sort of know now, because it's sort of like a big genre now, right? And the other thing is that he mentioned, which was in a talk that I actually went to, that he talked about, was sort of his outlines that he would do. So the grid patterns that he did for the comics, and why he used animals, which has to do with sort of Jewish propaganda or anti-Semitic propaganda, as well as some of like the Robert Crumb comics as well. So there was a lot of previous sort of propaganda posters and comics dealing with animals that he thought it was a good idea to sort of do with mouse as well. So MetaMaus sort of incorporated his journey with comic books and resulted in this thing that changed how we view comics now. While on the graphic novel, sort of talks about sort of a linear progression of what had happened and sort of what we're to expect now. Both were incredibly interesting. I think I got more out of MetaMaus than I did from on the graphic novel. I think they're both really important to read, and I think one of the reasons I didn't get a lot out of the graphic novel is because although I do appreciate them and I do like reading them, I only read certain sort of bigger names, and I wasn't a huge fan of some of the groundbreaking people that have written graphic novels. So I think On the Graphic Novel is definitely for someone who's like a huge fan of them, who likes a whole bunch of different kinds, or is sort of more aware of the history of it and can kind of see a more concise example of it in this book, while MetaMaus is probably a better introduction for people to sort of understand a little bit more of what went through the process of it and sort of the history of what Spiegelman had to do to get it. So hopefully that gives you a bit of a review for these two books and sort of how they're intertwined and sort of the things that I learned from them. Definitely a lot to think about, and definitely gave me a sort of understanding of how little I know about either sort of topics, but I would recommend both. So I will leave you to that, and comment, subscribe, do your thing as always, and I will talk to you guys later.